right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Student Alumni Career Week. If this is your first session of the week, I'm so glad you chose us and this topic, which is social media and audience engagement careers. And we have some really great panelists here to talk about the kind of work that they're doing in newsrooms that are really on the cutting edge of the profession and very exciting. So this is how this is going to work. I have some questions for the panelists. And by the way, I'm Alex Piles. I'm a lecturer at the Merrill College of Journalism. I teach digital design. I teach audience engagement and social media strategy. And I direct the audience engagement team of Capital News Service, which does a lot of the kind of work that I think our panelists are going to talk about today. So I'm going to ask them some questions about their work, but we're also really interested in what you want to know about the profession and how the panelists got to where they are at high-ranking, really cool positions at great newsrooms. So if you do have a question during our discussion, please just put it into the chat, and we'll take them as we get them. We're very happy to take your questions, and we'll wrap no later than 1:30. So get your questions in early. So with that, Britt, Emma, Amanda, thank you for joining us today. I wanted to start by asking each of you to tell us your origin story. And by that, I really just mean, what do you do for the job that you have now? But also, what did you do to get there? Were there classes that helped you in school, earlier job experiences that prepared you for your current role? Looks like I'm going to welcome also Eric. Eric has joined us, our last panelist. So hi, Eric. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Amazing. Getting a conference at Bloomberg, getting a conference room at Bloomberg is borderline impossible. So glad you did.
Well, I'm glad you could find one, and I'm glad you're here. Eric, I was just getting everybody started. I asked them to tell their origin story. I'm interested in how you got to the job that you have now and what experiences put you there, either that being past work experience, or courses that you took in school, or any advice that you have to sort of explain your path. Amanda, would you like to start?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Anderson. I am a director at ESPN on the social media team. Origin story in a nutshell, and if people have follow-up questions, this convo will go, whichever way it will. In terms of classes, I got into social media before it was even a department at ESPN. It was very uncentralized. Company of thousands of people were doing it at every which way and end. And so in terms of how did I get the experience to get into social when it wasn't really a formalized industry at the time? What I would say I did, which is increasingly hard now because it is, as anyone on this call knows, a formal role with a lot of expertise required. We're not just the interns. I would say I was able to parlay a lot of the skills I had built. I majored in broadcasted journalism at the time. I graduated in 2011. You could only go broadcast or print. That was it. There were digital classes, but that wasn't a focus. But what I was able to do, broadcast was my entry point into ESPN. That got me an internship. And when there were, rumblings of creating a social group and a social role, I was able to sell certain aspects of what I had learned both at Maryland in my other internships. And then in my formative first 4 or 5 years at ESPN, which were creativity, selling your story, strong headline writing. I had done aspects of that for anchors and TV, which does translate to some degree into tight social copy. How do I pick out the things that we're showing in our show that fans are interested in? And was able to sort of translate those skills into social with a couple additional skills like analytics and curiosity, really, because as we all know, following social over the last decade, it evolves very quickly, and being able to be inquisitive and keep up at the breakneck pace of that is definitely a skill over time. So that's my very short summary.
Great. Britt?
Yeah, hey. Hey everyone, I'm Britt Chang. I am a senior analyst at NPR on our growth and impact team for the newsroom. So that's a lot of blurred words. but essentially it translates to, I look at data and then I try to coach people how to use that data to effectively create content for people like you. And so a lot of that work is connected to like diversifying our audience, making sure our audience is getting younger and we're reaching the right people in the right spaces. But my background was also at Maryland as well. I got my undergrad at Maryland. Alex Piles was my teacher sophomore year. So luckily I did well in his class enough to be invited back here today. So that was a fun time. But I would say what inspired me to pivot from reporting into social and analytics was primarily kind of my experience at the Diamondback and a couple of Merrill classes that were really influential for me. So to date myself, back when I was working at the Diamondback, we still had a print edition every day of the week. And our online paper was basically copying the print articles and then pasting them onto the website and then hitting publish. And like, that was it. There was no like headline writing. There was no like social media really. It was kind of like auto tweeting. And so I was kind of getting burnt out by the reporting part of it. And my friend was like, hey, do you know this tool? It's like called Twitter. They have memes on there. And I was like, oh, great. This is way more interesting than, you know, reporting and getting the door slammed in your face. So I started doing that. And at the Diamondback, because this was like uncharted at the time, I was able to grow that entire department. So we built out an entire online audience team. We rebranded to become engagement editors. I created the first like director of digital strategy team. And so that was what I aspired to do. And now years later, I get to do that at my day job. So.
Great. Thanks, Britt. I won't ask if you're still that excited about Twitter. Emma.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Emma Grisado. I am the new social media coach at the Washington Post. It's a new job. I started in like the second week of January, so still getting adjusted in a new role, but it's been really great so far. And the main objective of my role is to look for opportunities for reporters to cultivate their own presence on their own accounts. So rather than working with brand accounts, like at Washington Post on the Instagram and the Twitter, and they do incredible stuff on those accounts, I'm more interested in individual reporters' accounts, whether that's a TikTok, an Instagram, even a Reddit. We've been really exploring different options and finding people who really want to jump into having their own presence, obviously connected to their work at the Post, but on their own. And that's been really exciting so far to be a part of. I graduated from Merrill in December of 2021. And I am very grateful to Britt for establishing that audience engagement team, which is how I got most of my audience experience through the Diamondback. At Merrill, I was actually really interested in data visualization and development. I did my capstone on the digital journalism team with Adam Martin. I worked at the Howard Center producing graphics for Nowhere to Go and Printing Hate, which are big investigative projects through the Howard Center. And so I was very involved in design and data, which I think lends itself really well to audience work, but it is different. So that's how I got my start at the Diamondback on their audience team. And after that, I interned briefly at NPR on their training team, where I was producing guides and resources for journalists in a public-facing way. So not just internal trainings, but also it's available on the internet if you want to go take a look at them. And after that, I did pretty pure like brand account audience engagement work at USA Today. I was in the breaking news shift. I worked overnights on Saturdays and late nights on Fridays. And it was a lot of push alerts and getting the news out as quickly as possible, sending an alert, but also posting the Instagram. So both of that, I think, lended itself really well to the job I have now. And I'm really lucky to have it and excited to be here and talk to you guys about it.
Thanks, Emma. There may be a class at this college that uses a lot of NPR training materials in it, so thank you. And Eric.
Hi. So I graduated from Merrill in 2013, and that was kind of, I think, a weird confluence of when journalism schools were really, or journalism writ large, was really just starting to recognize social media and the force it could be. And that was something I kind of found myself very, very interested in doing. But, like with Amanda, that track didn't really exist at the time. So I ended up going down the broadcast path, but I created this weird sort of like hybrid role for myself of doing the broadcast stuff, but also taking my I cannot remember the name of it. Capital News Service capstone in the online bureau at the time. And I just, I got my first job at a local TV station in Buffalo, and I was supposed to be a morning show producer, but it wasn't really working out. And just by nature, I think of like being the most online person there at the time, which is not a very, very high bar in 2013. I just fell into a role of being this assignment editor / social media editor. And I was just like, oh, this is what I'm really good at. So I just stuck with that. And it took me to another local TV station in DC, WUSA. I wound up working at BuzzFeed for a few years. And now I'm here at Bloomberg, where, again, I'm in like that sort of transitionary role where I was brought in, mainly to focus on Business Week. But Bloomberg is a very, very large company where I keep finding new things where I'm just like, oh no, I want to fix this. Oh no, I want to fix this, which is great for opportunities, but it also, creates challenges of like defining your role. And Alex, if you'll allow me to like guide the conversation a little bit, I think it's really interesting that as we've all talked about what we're doing right now, how little of that involves touching branded accounts on a day-to-day basis, which I think says so much about how this social media and audience development space has shifted really in the last, 2 to 3 years.
For sure. Does anyone have any thoughts on that topic?
Where do we start?
Yeah, right. Well, so here's something. A lot of you have jobs that just frankly didn't exist not that long ago, right? One of the examples that I give in my classes often is that it took until 2021 for the LA Times, one of our biggest newspapers, to elevate somebody to like top management level who was in charge of audience engagement. So can you tell us like what changes that you've seen just in your time in newsrooms, and also what it's like being in this emerging field that's within this very well established profession? Whoever wants to start on that, please do.
I can start. So I got into social in 2015, and just to enhance the example that Alex just gave at the LA Times at ESPN, when I was looking for this role that was, starting to look something like social, similar to Eric, it was social / digital. I was working on the website a little bit. I was maybe the 6th or 7th person to join the team. Flash forward to 2023, our social department at ESPN is 70 people, which is really a breakneck rate of growth, especially inside, again, a very traditional, longstanding company. What's led to that more than anything, I think, is a couple factors. One, just the reach that we have across of all of our different accounts. So by no means are we just like this, bonus audience that you're reaching. A lot of people are interacting with brands, not only just ESPN, with social from the start. They never had linear cable television and probably never will. So the extended reach and the value we have just in being able to reach and connect with fans is enormous. We also promote and create a lot of revenue for the company, which gets people to pay attention, right? So at least at ESPN, the multiple functions that we serve between promoting our talent and website and leaders, our website, driving awareness about things like the college football playoff or Monday Night Football or the WNBA draft is immensely valuable, and how we're connecting with fans that are 13 to 24. were the front door into that. And that has led to the respect and understanding company-wide that we're an important team to collaborate with.
I just want to piggyback off of that. I think one thing you said that stood out to me is like how important it is that even legacy organizations are beginning to really trust your audience teams. You know, back in the day, it used to be like very, like you said, linear, both in delivering information from like reporters, then you put it on social, then people receive it. And now it's much more democratized. So it goes both ways. Like fans will then send you content and you can create experiences together. I think another big portion of how audience teams have like evolved the industry as well is there used to be this extremely strong firewall between like, if you're creating content, you don't ever think about money, like don't even talk about it, don't put data in the same room. And what we found is that actually when you marry data and when you understand how the business side works better, you then take that into the newsrooms that you work in, and having that interdisciplinary approach will make and strengthen newsrooms for the better, I think.
Britt, I couldn't agree with that point more when it comes to the newsroom's overall interest in data. That's something that I have found here, where there just really doesn't have that sort of data structure. The infrastructure doesn't exist, and a lot of editors are kind of operating in the dark about what is working on the web, what is working on search. And you know, and another challenge that we have here at Bloomberg too is, because the terminal is this company's, you know, very, very famous product, and it is very much a walled garden, we have the added challenge of how do we get people to think outside the walled garden? Where it's like, you know, we might have someone who is really, really specialized on like FTX rates, and that's not a thing that's really going to drive attention on social. So we need to find our spots within this very, very large apparatus to make it work. But again, it speaks to how the skills of making information concise and engaging are applicable to both how we present our news outside to the world, but also how do we present news about ourselves to the rest of the newsroom.
Something else I wanted to add, and I can't speak as much to like the long-term changes of this industry, but I will say that I feel like I've seen a bigger willingness to let social content inform reporting. And I think that creates a really great value proposition for people to be more online on an individual basis. So it's no longer just we need to have a Twitter account to tweet our stories, to get people to click, to hit the paywall, to pay us. It's, I want to find out what people's monkeypox symptoms look like. So I am going to search it on TikTok, and I'm going to get 1,000 videos of what that looks like. And that's a real thing that a reporter, Bennett Nirapil, did at the Washington Post. And he wrote 2 stories completely comprised of existing TikTok content, turned it into vignettes of people experiencing that disease. And I think that, or that infection, I should say. And I think that pushes people to find those stories in ways that I guess are maybe not considered traditional to like longstanding reporting practices, but they produce content that is much more in tune with the way other people are experiencing the internet and how they're experiencing how they receive information, and news organizations need to be competitive with that and not just with each other.
I love that.
And Emma, I think that's a really important point too, about the shift from newsrooms viewing social media as, here is a place where we put the links, it will drive traffic, and that is the end of the story for being a social media editor. Where, you know, these days it really does feel like if you have a smart social media strategy, it feels as much of a community engagement strategy as anything. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about the twilight of Twitter and Facebook as the platforms that really were our centers of gravity in this industry. But, you know, speaking for me personally at Bloomberg, we're focusing a little bit more on Reddit, which is, by its definition, a community engagement platform. I know the Washington Post has done a lot of work on Reddit as well, thanks to Gene Park, and they made an interesting hire over at Reddit recently. But it goes to what you're talking about, where it is using social media as a reporting tool and as a tool to connect directly with people, not a tool to drive traffic. I mean, I think that's just a really, really fundamental shift that doesn't show up in the bottom line or in the traffic numbers. So it's selling that shift isn't the easiest one, but that's what these places are now. And I think, if we want to be on the cutting edge, we have to adapt.
These are great points. I'm so fascinated. I don't even know which direction I want to go next. I'm so fascinated with this idea of needing to trust audience engagement teams and newsrooms. I think, and sort of how that has evolved over time, and how when we're working on projects here at the University of Maryland, with our Howard Center for Investigative Journalism or our Povich Center for Sports Journalism or with Capital News Service, one of the things that I always want is for the audience engagement team to be involved in those projects from the very, very, very beginning. And often that happens. And when it does happen, the projects are better for all of the reasons that you've already articulated. But there's still an undercurrent in some places, I think. Amanda, you mentioned this. A lot of people think that social media is just it's fun marketing, right? That was your word that you gave, your phrase that you gave me. It's just fun marketing. And I've definitely heard that before. So can you tell us maybe at ESPN, what's the reality of that intersection between social media and journalism, and not just promoting your story, right?
It's so multifaceted at ESPN because there's a funny tweet that says ESPN is not just, or social media is not just marketing, graphic design, PR, journalism, et cetera. It's all of it. And that rings so true to our team because do we have certain teammates who are in charge of prioritizing company priorities and coming up with a social concept that works with it? Yes. Majority of our content creation, and this has been the key to our success, is being fan first and content first. So majority of the stuff we're putting out is hey, we think this is a great story or a great video. And how are we connecting with fans in that authentic way? If we're posting something that's just hey, sign up for tournament challenge for March Madness, if that's the primary function of it, it's not going to take off and reach people on social media in the first place. Do we align with PR and marketing on certain concepts? Yes, but it's certainly not our primary thing. And our message to other departments and people is, hey, this isn't going to succeed. And if it's not going to reach a lot of people, then we need to rethink what our concept is and why we're doing it.
Do any of you have anything to add along those lines? If not, I have a question for Emma.
Oh, sure. I was just going to say really quickly, I think what Amanda said about it's not just this, it's also this, especially coming to the Washington Post, seeing how many different people do all of these things that in smaller newsrooms fall onto one or two people. There are really 15 jobs that an audience engagement journalist is doing at a given time, whether it's data analytics or an audience insights editor, but then also a push alerts editor, also a homepage curation editor, also an Instagram designer, also an Instagram poster and curator, also a coach for people to write their own reader call-outs on their own platforms, also a newsletter editor, also a TikTok editor. It's amazing how multifaceted these people in this industry are. And I think something that's always really impressed me, and so much of my intro into this industry was just talking with people doing these jobs. I did networking calls every 30 minutes I had when I was in college. I was calling anybody who would talk to me, just to hear about how they do their work. And not only is it these people have many talents that they can achieve anything on any platform, but it also lends it really well to navigating to other parts of the newsroom. You have a lot of flexibility to be a part of a lot of amazing things that go on in a newsroom. And you're very valuable as an audience editor.
Jordan has a question in the chat that I want to get to in just 1 second, but just to sort of maybe close the loop on this line of questioning real quick. Audience engagement folks in newsrooms tend to just sort of naturally become newsroom trainers. Emma, you've had a couple of jobs where was actually in your title, right? And I'm just wondering how, if you ever get any resistance. Like, are there folks in the newsroom who aren't interested or don't want to try something new? And how do you approach those situations? It sounds interesting to me.
Yeah, I think so when I was at NPR, I wasn't hosting newsroom trainings as much. I was more producing guides and like helping with their Twitter in sort of a voicey and fun way that allowed me to experiment, and the NPR interns Twitter, which is endlessly fun. But when I was at USA Today, for example, it was not a part of my job to be a trainer, but I was training people, and I helped run a Reddit training for individual reporters because lots of newsrooms are shifting a bit more towards Reddit, like Eric mentioned. The way I've always presented my trainings is it being a resource to everybody and not a requirement. And I think that makes it more approachable. It depends on the platform and it depends on someone's beat, for example. But for a lot of things like TikTok, for example, it's supposed to be fun. And you want to feel like it's not an extra stressor and an extra thing on your plate. And if you're doing a ton of investigative work and you don't have time to film a TikTok, that's okay. I think the most important thing I've seen with like all of the people I've reached out to and like trainings and resources I've given people is having buy-in from other people in the newsroom. And so I guess that's more like what you're asking is like finding that buy-in. Thankfully, I haven't really experienced people being like, I don't want to do any of that, because I think that there's been a bit of a change in the industry where people see the importance of doing this. The only thing that I think can be daunting for people, especially reporters who are constantly on deadline, maybe in the field, kind of running around chasing stories, is finding the time to carve out to do it. So one of the things that I'm working on is almost like a poster. And like when I worked at NPR, I made posters of like how to sound better on the air when you have a cold. And like, it's like a one sheet, people can print it out, they can have it at their desks. I want to make one that's like, do you have 5 minutes? Here's what you can do with 5 minutes. Do you have 10 minutes? Here's what you can do with 10 minutes, and make it as approachable as possible. I have had to shift my perspective a little bit because working in a newsroom where it was like breaking news, you're the expert on the brand accounts. Here's all the things you need to know. I'm the expert. I'm going to go do everything. And I was talking to people who were doing at that same level of audience knowledge. Now I speak to people who aren't on Instagram. And so shifting and understanding that this person doesn't know Instagram stories versus Instagram reels and why reels perform better, but maybe they don't perform better now because now they're shifting back to static posts and they aren't coming in with that institutional knowledge. A big phrase in audience journalism is like meet people where they are. And I think that's true, not just for like where they physically are, but also their like comprehension level of like, where are they starting from at this platform? So my guides are like, here's how to set up your account, and you can jump to whatever spot you're at. But you have to understand that not everyone's coming from the same place of like audience expertise that I had experienced working with colleagues in a pure audience job in my last role.
Thanks, Emma. That's great. Does anyone have anything else to add, or should we start taking some questions from our audience? Okay, well, you want to talk about TikTok? So Jordan asks, how has using TikTok worked for each of your jobs? And how does it feel different from more traditional ways to use social media for news? I don't know how many of you are working actively with TikTok, but anyone who is, who'd like to start?
I could say something quickly about TikTok. I don't work on the Washington Post TikTok. Sorry to disappoint. I was in one recently, but I'm not like part of the decision-making process for any of that. What I will say is that I've been working on getting reporters to make their own TikToks, which is one of these things that I think is when you're not native to that platform and producing TikToks in the TikTok app is really hard. And it's really hard to get people excited about it and trying it out. The biggest thing I tell everyone when I have them produce anything themselves or film anything of themselves is be as natural and as human as possible. I think that's different than maybe something like Twitter, where if you're writing a big thread, it's going to be very particular and hitting all the points of this narrative story that you've worked on for a year. Like when I have people make a TikTok, I'm like, here, take out your phone and just talk like you're talking to me, talk like you're on a FaceTime. And I think that that's something that is so valuable. And I think that face to face, I guess it's not really someone else's face, but seeing someone's face and seeing them talk to you like a normal person and not like in a broadcast, very scripted way, that cultivates a very strong amount of trust between these audience members and someone at the post who maybe 20 years ago, you couldn't even email somebody like that. And now they're in your phone and they're talking to you about their story. So I find it really valuable. And it's just another one of those things where you really have to show why that's so special. But because it's so casual, like it is a really accessible way of content producing. So that's what I would say.
I will say something small about TikTok, more just to answer the second part of the question of how has it changed news consumption. Unfortunately, our TikTok strategy here at Bloomberg is a little bit behind the 8 ball, but that's a story for a different day. The fact that we don't have that chronological timeline anymore, and it's really, really driven on an algorithm timeline, I think really changes the definition of what is breaking news. And, some type of story that maybe, 3 or 4 years ago is just like you pop that on Twitter, it gets, thousands of retweets, and it's like, all right, great job, team. Now, if TikTok is that conversation that platform that drives the conversation, and content isn't being showed to people in the same way that, we're used to seeing it when it comes to what is breaking news, it really does, apologies for the terminal alerts going off, it really does, change what is breaking news to to publishers and to an audience. And then once you start going down that rabbit hole, it really makes you think about, okay, well then how do we make our news seem urgent to people? Because it just, attention is a finite resource.
I can touch on TikTok a little bit too from a competitive standpoint. I think for a really long time before all these social platforms came out, news organizations just looked at each other as competitors. And there was one way to deliver the news, and that was the only way, right? But then with TikTok, you saw people were just leaving websites in droves. People were having news fatigue. And there was this myth that nobody was interested in news anymore. People were only wanting jokes on TikTok. There's no space for it on that platform. And when we saw, for example, the Gabby Petito news, the incident that happened, I think maybe it was a year and a half ago now, that went viral on TikTok. And it just goes to show that news organizations need to step up and meet where the platforms are and where that algorithm works and kind of play the game, because there's so much misinformation out there that we can't afford to not be on those platforms and playing by those rules to get our information out there.
Building off of what Britt said, playing by those rules, something we repeat often to internal and external partners is a reminder that when we're on these platforms, we don't write the rules of what is successful content. And so, yes, if you were to look at ESPN or any of our other brand handles of the type of content we put on TikTok, it doesn't skew news heavy. And, our response for that is hey, we have other outlets that we put that on. We have talent personalities who have presences on TikTok, which can lead into that first person narrative. Hey, Kevin Durant was traded. Here's what you need to know. But placing that in the right account and then doing that storytelling right does take a totally different skill set than, say, working up a breaking news graphic that we would post very quickly on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc. And that just, again, speaks to the nature of all of us experience working in social media is one day, it's all about Instagram Reels, and the next day Reels stop working and the algorithm seems kind of slow for us and we're going to be all in on TikTok. And so That's always changing. The platforms are changing what works, what new developments and product tools they're going to be making. You know, a year ago, we were doing tons of Twitter spaces, right? And who could have predicted the place we'd be in now? So being nimble to pivot and experiment with that new type of storytelling is never something that, you know, anyone leading social should be shying away from.
I also wanted to say really quickly, I really like what Amanda said. We don't write the rules on what's successful on these platforms. The way that I consume content now, like with my like audience brain or whatever, is like anything that I see that I think can be adapted to be something that's about the news. I have a spreadsheet of like 25 TikTokers, and like maybe one of them is a journalist, and I write down like who they are, what they talk about, what I like about their content, who in this newsroom could use that type of content or draw inspiration for them. How does their video format work for someone who reports on health or someone who reports on data? We have great data columnists. And so I am constantly looking for inspiration. Very infrequently is it from a news person. And I think that something that is great about the internet is that you can always find someone doing something good, but also doing something better than you. And like a lot of people in audience, I think, are pretty competitive, and you can always find something that you can try to do more of or try to experiment with. And there are tons of people who are filling these like roles that news used to fill. So like there's this one creator I love, and he talks about brand marketing and like logos and typefaces. Like the videos he makes used to be listicles. Like they used to be on digital sites, and people used to like see them in Snapchat stories, and some people still do, but he isn't affiliated with any newsroom. He just does it for fun. And what can I learn from that? Are there things that I can do to make it better and make it something that someone in my newsroom would find valuable and like get excited about participating in? So constantly finding inspiration in things that are not at all news related, I think, is a really great way to sort of like achieve that success that's being set by this community online.
Both Rachel and Jordan in the chat had questions about jobs that I think we should take together. So broadly, how do you find these jobs in audience engagement? Are they all in New York City? Are they all in DC? Where should folks be looking, and how can they start applying and be successful?
I can talk a bit about this because I graduated decently recently, and I've had 3 roles in the last like year and a half. There are a few things that I would suggest. There are a few Twitter communities, they've been a bit buggy lately, so I don't know. It's worth a shot to look into them, but who knows if they'll be working great today? I'm not sure. But there are also like Slack groups. There's a lot of resources online. There's journalism jobs. There's journalism jobs and a photo of my dog. It's a Substack newsletter. There is journalism mentors. It's a website where you can reach out to people who are volunteering their time to network with you. I stared at these websites like it was my job. Haha. Like I truly was always looking. And that, I think, is the first step. And as a caveat to that, I will say don't apply to everything. I applied to 50 jobs and I got rejected from all of them. And it was really horrible. And I got really burnt out, and I wasn't applying thoughtfully. I was just hoping that something would stick. When I started really, really working on making a great application, that was when I started seeing success. So whether it was creating an Instagram guide of posts I've worked on and linking that in my resume, creating a Twitter moment of the same thing, finding creative ways. We use creative platforms all the time. You can use it for yourself as well. Those are all suggestions I would say are great. I will also say there are plenty of remote journalism jobs. I was just in one, and audience engagement you can do from anywhere. There are definitely a lot of news publishers who are based in New York, based in DC, but these jobs exist, and starting out on all of these like searching sites and like connecting with people online. And there are so many people that just through networking, like the first thing I did when I started building up my Twitter is I followed anyone who had a job that I was interested in. I followed tons of people in audience engagement, and like it took a really long time for some of them to follow me back, but I was learning from them every day. And then I asked to call them, and I asked to have a Zoom with them, and I asked them questions. And when they had jobs on their teams, they sent them to me. And cultivating these relationships, like the one thing I love about the audience section of the journalism industry is it is small and there's so much community around it because people see so much value in that because it's so integral to our jobs. Like we are all willing to help. And I would suggest like anyone is more than welcome to reach out to me to talk. And I like found so much success in speaking with other people because it also helped me hear about what they actually do. Job postings are great and they usually get at a decent amount of what the job entails, but hearing directly from someone like what their day-to-day looks like will help you make a really great cover letter. Use the language they use. Talk about like your experiences that directly relate to something they said that they worked on. Those are all the tips I have, I think.
They're good ones. Amanda's added a few, and Britt has in the chat as well. Do you all have anything else you want to add on jobs?
I think another thing is if you look around the backgrounds of where we're calling in from, not all of us are in a newsroom right now. And so I think that goes to show how the pandemic has actually changed the industry and shifted the nexus from DC and New York to a lot of different places. I think another thing I would jump in and say is that I remember graduating and being like, I need to work at the Washington Post, or like, I'm going to be so upset. I still have not worked at the Washington Post, but at the time I had taken a chance on a job that was essentially a startup at the time. So like SB Nation and Vox are now, you know, big brands, but back in the day when I graduated, it was like very much a startup. And so you can actually grow faster in some of those startup environments when you take a chance versus at a legacy organization where you're kind of lost sometimes in a much bigger crowd of interns. And so taking advantage of that. And then I would also recommend using the fact that you are a student right now to reach out to people you admire, because in my experience, it's much easier to, when you're still learning and starting, for people to like really want to talk to you and give you a lot of time. And there's a lot of journalists who post like open office hours that you can sign up for. And I can drop a couple of those in the chat too.
I can't agree. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say really quickly, I would also suggest looking into the conference circuit. I attended the Online News Association conference the summer before I graduated. I attended the sessions that were hosted by people in this industry, and I was grabbing information the same way. They have student rates. It does get more expensive when you're a professional. So I think it's the same thing Britt is saying, like, take advantage of this time when you're a student. There are also scholarships. There are tons of scholarships you can apply for to attend these. Some of them even send you in person. You can attend these remotely, but it's a great way to see like who's doing innovative things in this field and hear from them directly. And even like in these conferences, they have like portals where you can message people directly who are all part of the conference, which I think is a good way to like grab people's attention.
I'll keep it brief. I just completely agree with everything Britt said, especially taking advantage of the fact that you're a student, as well as it's okay if you go to a smaller place and get a lot of hands-on experience that way. My first job was, again, at a small TV station in Buffalo, New York. And they gave me the chance to kind of do anything I wanted because, again, it was weird to be 23 and kind of be established as, oh, you're the person who understands this better than anyone else. But those were the times. And it You get to do a lot and learn what you are good at better and really quickly. So it is okay if you do not go and walk right into one of these big legacy newsrooms right away. It's okay to go somewhere small, take a chance on yourself, and take a chance on the place that's willing to offer you an opportunity.
All great advice. Thank you. Thank you all. Marianelli in the chat asked a really important question. And when I emailed with the panelists before this started, all of them responded with some version of, we need to talk about mental health and burnout in the workplace. So Marianelli, thank you for this question. She asks, how do you guys maintain a work-life balance? I ask, since certain industries like journalism often leave little to no room to balance your work and your home life. Britt, would you like to start on this?
Ooh, yes, burnout is very real. Often as journalists, we're asked to be like online all the time, or not being able to unplug. So that is very real, especially if you're working at a smaller place. There is a lot of pressure of like, you're the only person maybe who is doing any type of audience work. And so if you're off, it's like, who is doing it? So I think part of it is training, and organizations really need to invest in training in order to make sure that this is long-term sustainable for all of us. And then two, I've had a couple of these feelings throughout my career where, so I got my start in social media teams. So I was like running accounts on weekends and nights as well, and got to the point where I said to myself, what do I actually want to do? And taking that decision and saying, maybe it's okay that I'm not going to work in a newsroom forever, and setting boundaries for myself where I say, like I said to myself before I took this job, like my next job is going to be a 9-to-5 and it's still going to be in journalism, but somehow I'm going to make it happen. And I think that's okay too.
Yeah, I will say, like, coming from a job where I worked, my schedule when I was at USA Today was 2 to 10 p.m. Tuesday through Friday, with an overnight on Saturday night, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. When you're a young person right out of college, that's when all the people with 9-to-5s like join kickball leagues and like, go to happy hours and stuff. I lived at home and I just did the work, and I learned so much. And I think it's sort of like what Eric said, like I was on a smaller team. I was doing everything. I absorbed so much, but I also was like, I know this isn't sustainable for me. And so I did start looking for other opportunities, and it's incredible the way the like stars aligned for me, that this job was like happening when it happened, and I got chosen for it, and I felt so uniquely prepared for it. But I think something that sometimes in those shift-based jobs is a little bit, there's a benefit to it because it's very shift based. In my experience, it was like you are on 2 to 10 and then like you are not on. I think something that like sort of Britt said, like with training, like documentation, and that comes from like my guides and stuff. But if there's something that you're the only person who knows how to do, write it all down and say, here's the guide on it. And anyone's welcome to follow the guide. I wrote guides for people who weren't sure how to like do collaboration posts on Instagram, for example. Like these were sort of newer features that like naturally as a younger person on the platform, like I was just getting in the habit of using on my own, and I started writing down all the rules. So that's something that I would suggest. I think also this is one of the first things that I was told when I was networking with someone. I don't know, like, so I reached out to Bobby Blanchard, who's the director of audience or chief audience officer at the Texas Tribune. They have incredible audience journalism. And if you don't follow him or that newsroom, please go follow them. I'm their #1 fan constantly. And I learned so much from them, like just talking to him. And it was so valuable early on in my career. When I talked to him, I had like a 20-minute call with him. He said, like, what are your hobbies? And I didn't have any. Like truly, I was working 2 jobs at the Diamondback. I was a full-time student and I had an internship at NPR. It was so much, and it was like 4 months, and I was like, I can do this for 4 months, and I had no time for myself. As soon as I like was on the other end of that. I graduated, I had a little more time. I taught myself how to crochet, and like, I'm not great at it, but like, I have something that like, you can't be on your phone and crocheting at the same time. Like, I have something that I do on my own, and like, when I'm not working, I like do something else. And I didn't have a hobby. Like, it sounds crazy, but like, I'm like rambling at this point because I just can't believe it. But find something you're passionate about that's not work, that will serve you so well, whether it's like cooking or exercising or painting or literally anything else. And like, not to make it about work again, but it will make you better at your job. You will be an expert in something that a lot of people in the newsroom know nothing about. One day there will be a story about crocheting and someone's not going to know the terminology, and they're going to know you crocheted, and you're going to be able to help someone. Like, truly find something else you're passionate about. And something that like I tell everyone I work with is like, don't be afraid to be seen trying something. I saw it in a TikTok recently and I love it. Like, it applies to work, but it applies to life too. Don't be afraid to be seen trying. Like, try something new, learn from it, try something else new if you don't like it, and be intent on using time when you're not at work to do something else. And don't just like sit on TV or sit on TikTok, because that feels like work. When you're in audience engagement, do something that's not screens.
I think there's a specific type of burnout that also applies to the audience development space, where because, while again, these platforms have existed for a decade now, they are still in their, this is still an infancy in compared to just like the history of news and a lot of these institutions broadly. And for the better part of this decade, I think for a lot of audience editors, there was always the pressure to say yes to things. Like, yes, we will do this. Yes, I will do this. Yes, yes, yes. And I think one of my goals for this year is to, better work with my team, but also myself, to say it is okay to say no to stuff, because A, our team is understaffed, and B, we can't be everything all at once. And we're at a point where it's like, I can't do this for you because you should be able to do it by yourself right now. Like, that's just kind of where the game is. My other burnout tip is therapy. Good, you should do it.
Let's one to therapy.
I have a couple of builds off of Emma and Eric. I totally echo Emma on the hobbies, and even if it never comes into play in your job, that's really good. A lot of people, I think, when they first get into the industry, look at like whatever the big, at least at ESPN, the big sporting event this weekend, I just got to get through that. But with your career, you're playing the long game. And if you go so hard in your first year and you're going to your manager and saying like, I'm burnt out, I don't know what to do, you may not last in an industry that you were initially drawn to. Echoing Eric on saying no to things, because not everything's a priority. If everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. And so if you're finding yourself logging on when you're on vacation, or you're off because you're the only social person, and your boss's boss who may not know and be adept at social media saying like, this tweet needs to go out, well, that might invite a conversation about, hey, like, we should hire another social person if this is a priority, because I'm 23, I'm entry level, and this isn't my problem. So I know it's intimidating to kind of have that mentality when you start out, because you're like, I just want to help and I want to show, and there's ways to do that. Something I find myself being cognizant of in my week to week is there are times where you may have to go above and beyond when there's a big project or a good stretch opportunity, or your leader is out on child bonding leave. And there's just going to be those periods where you're going to have to pull a little bit extra effort and feel tired. And maybe if there's an endpoint and that's worthwhile to you, that could parlay into growth, leadership, promotions, opportunities, etc. You're never going to like be the standout employee by just doing the status quo. But if you're going to do that, make sure it's something that aligns with your company or your leader's priorities. I see a lot of people burning themselves out, and I was like, who told you to spend 9 hours on that thing? And the answer is no one. And that kind of can show a little bit of immaturity and or lack of understanding of the bigger picture. So always think about the bigger picture. The other thing I've learned is don't necessarily look to your immediate manager or your teammate or leaders on what to do for mental health. what I've found in managing so many employees is that mental health means different things to different people. And so if you're just waiting for your boss to tell you, like, take a vacation, or, oh, do you not like, split off days when we have someone else out and you need to cover? Is that something that's difficult for you? That's not how you recharge? Great. But I caution people about saying like, oh, my manager never like calls out sick. If you're sick and you have sick days, like, call out sick. And it sometimes places a burden on us as managers to try and read minds. And I would just encourage everyone in this climate, in most cultures and colleagues and people I talk to, and I can only speak for ESPN, and I know that's not always the case for other people, is just say what you need. Post 2020, there's been such an opening of being able to talk about therapy and things that you need or things going on. Take advantage of that. We live in a really good time where it's very acceptable to be vocal about that and talk about what you need as much as you're comfortable. If you're not, that's okay too. But take advantage of that time that we're working in.
I want to also, sorry, Alex. I also want to just also caveat it from a perspective of power. So when you're like a first year employee or an intern, obviously it is very scary to go up to your manager and say, I need time off, right? Because you feel like your job's on the line, or you need to prove yourself, or you just feel like maybe your manager doesn't understand. And while I would love if the reality was that every manager would be completely understanding of all circumstances, sometimes that's just not the case. And so I highly recommend finding spaces in your workplace where you do feel safe. So like maybe that's a mentor figure, an ERG group. Some organizations have other like young early career journalists like support channels in Slack. And so reaching out to other people to say like, oh, how did you do that? Or like, how can you help me like craft this language so that I'm not going to get turned down, etc. I think that is really helpful too.
If I can give one small piece of advice just to piggyback off of what Amanda said, one lesson that I have really internalized is there's always another train. It's really, really easy to look at a big project, a big priority from a lot of people, and think like, oh no, we didn't do this one thing I want to do, or we didn't execute on this one thing as well as I had wanted to. There is going to be another opportunity. There is going to be another big project, a big story where you can take what you learned in this past experience and move on from there. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got from the news director I worked at in Buffalo was just, was talking about the next day. And it's like, it's a blank rundown every day. If you make a mistake, you're going to have another opportunity to move on from it and do something better. So that's just a piece of advice I'd like to impart on you all.
This has been a great discussion. We're coming up on time. So in the 75 seconds we have left, maybe do a lightning round real quick. For anyone who listened to this conversation today and said, yep, I'm interested, I want to do this, I'm persuaded, what skills should they be trying to develop now so that when they graduate, they're in a good position to go get these kinds of jobs? And also, panelists, you've been wonderful. Thank you. We got a lot of questions that we didn't get to. If you're interested in hearing from any participant, maybe drop some contact information into the chat for them to grab in case they want to ask questions offline. But anyone who wants to start, skills that should be developed if they want to go into this kind of work.
I would just say, speaking from ESPN perspective, because social media has been, a career field and a job that you can get now in multiple different fields. Proven experience is really critical for us, whether that's at your athletic department, another company. Additionally, more and more, we see people who have just built their own accounts, whether that's a fan affinity account. Even if you say, let's say you're interested in sports, but you've built up a really large presence on TikTok about travel, that still demonstrates that skill set of like, wow, this person really understands TikTok. If you can sell us on the sports knowledge, great. But being able, the access for anyone to sort of prove that they know social just starts with even just launching an account.
I think above anything else, like obviously understanding these platforms is key in a job where you have to work on them. A willingness to learn and experiment and be like a little scrappy, I guess, for lack of like a better word, but just if you are really passionate about getting someone on camera and making a TikTok, and there are a few people that people want you to go through, grab a camera and grab like a mic, or don't even grab a mic, you might not have a mic, grab a camera and like go and try it out and be able to show people like, look, I tried this and I didn't know that much about it and it really wasn't that hard. And I think that this is something we can do, like something I think a lot of audience journalists are very creative. Don't be afraid to share your ideas and don't be afraid to try other people's ideas and try something you're new at. Yeah, that's what I would say.
I'm going to go with writing, data, and how to communicate ideas with a large amount of people, because I just think internal communication is one of those areas that is really, really valued in this space. I'm about to be kicked out of this room. Great talking with you all.
Thanks, Eric. Britt, do you have anything to add, or should we wrap?
Yeah, just communication, empathy, understanding your audiences both internally and externally. So, but it's been very fun. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you all, and thank you all for attending. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks.